wonderful programs and ideas and initiatives, and it's always an honor for us to partner with them. And I have a normal, my apologies to the normal class. I see some of you are here Sunday morning, but if I can participate a little bit in the wonderful Greater Washington Community Colo programming, it's an honor to do so. So thank you very much. Also, just before we get started, I want to give a special thank you to Stuart Rosenthal. Years ago, Stuart has organized a meaningful Tefilah initiative. I'm sure many of you have participated in these programs over the years. Years ago, he said to me, we really need to talk on anti-Semitism. And the normal way it works with Stuart is he comes up with a great idea, I push him off for approximately 3 weeks, and then at some point it sinks in and I realize it's a great idea. So actually, the overwhelming majority of whatever we're going to talk about today is actually something I prepared for a talk inspired by Stuart's urgings years ago. So thank you very much. I guess I want to give a disclaimer or two. First thing is, of course, to state the obvious. There's a lot that we have to do, there's a lot that we have to be careful about in terms of anti-Semitism in this world. Unfortunately, we have to work very, very hard to be safe today as communities and as individuals. We know that. We have to work very, very hard to work on diplomacy. We have to work very hard to work on how the world looks at Israel and how the world looks at Jews. We have to work very hard. We do not need to give anybody any more material for any social media about how bad the Jews are. We have to work hard at all of those things. And please understand that I think of that as a given for this discussion. That's all self-evident, and I think you're all intelligent people. I don't think you came to hear that. As intelligent people, it's very natural for us to try to come up with solutions to problems. And it's something that we've thought about many times in our lives, many times around the dining room table. Lord knows, surely we talk about it between aliyahs sometimes, maybe even during the rabbi's speech. But why do we have such a problem with anti-Semitism? And naturally, because we're thoughtful people, because we're part of a thoughtful nation, people make all kinds of suggestions and all kinds of ideas. And I'm sure some of it is helpful, but in the big picture, I don't know, with all due respect to everyone, it doesn't seem to make a difference. And so that's really what I want to talk about today. And the sources, I don't know if you've glanced at the source sheet is in the table in the back. You can decide if you consider it the table of the refreshments that happen to have the source sheet on it, or the table of the source sheet that happen to have the refreshments on it. I'll leave it to your personal opinion. But these are old sources, and that's part of the point. And I hope it'll be more clear as we begin to go through. I think if you wanted a punchline, my personal take on anti-Semitism is vis-a-vis stopping anti-Semitism. There's very, very little we can do, but on the other hand, we can accomplish it all. And that'll hopefully make a little more sense as we go through. I should, before we start, it's always an honor to have my parents attend many times my various talks that I give and the like. I have to give a special thank you to my parents this morning because we have car issues, so I got here this morning with my parents' vehicle. So thank you to my parents for everything they do for me and my family, but for giving me 4 wheels for the day. Thank you very much. Okay, starting at the top, and some of it is translated, some of it isn't. Obviously, I'll translate everything as I go, but for people who'd like to follow along, please feel free to do so. Bris ben Absarim, the famous moment with Abraham, where he interacts with God, and famous image, and there's this covenant that God makes with him. By the way, part of the covenant is he references the Jewish experience in Egypt. Just interesting to think about. But he also talks about the great promise that he will give to Avram's descendants. There's a pasuk at the beginning over there, and the pasuk reads as follows: Vayashemesh lavo. The sun was setting. V'sardema nafla al Avram, and a slumber fell over Avram. V'nei ema chashecha gdola nofelas alav. A fear of a great darkness fell upon him. Very, very dramatic imagery, a fear of a great darkness. Not so normal for Torah language, to be candid with you. It's a very interesting Ramban, which is the next source. The Ramban brings down a medrash as follows. V'nei eima chashecha gdola nofeles, darshu bo remez l'shibud arba galios. This phrasing is understood as alluding to the 4 exiles that our people will have through the generations. We're going to talk a lot about the 4 exiles today, just to give people just a broad sense. I don't want to get too bogged down, but when we talk about the 4 exiles, the most traditional understanding is when Babylonia comes and destroys the first temple, the first Beis Hamikdash, and exiles the Jewish people. That is the first exile. That sort of shifts into the Galus of Paras Umadai, Persia and Media. That ultimately is associated with Galus Yavan, Greece, and that ultimately there's a gap. But for example, the Hanukkah story happens during Galus Yavan, just to give you a sense a little bit. But after a brief gap, there's what we know as Galus Edom. And Galus Edom is associated with Rome, but the traditional understanding is it sort of morphs from one form into another form, and the traditional understanding is Galus Edom will end with the building of the 3rd Beis Hamikdash, the 3rd temple, which means that we're still in it. So we're going to talk a lot today about the 4 exiles. The Ramban says that this, for bringing down the medrash, that this phrasing of the Ema, Chashecha, Gedolo, Nofelos Alav is an allusion to the 4 exiles. Ki matza hanavi benafsho ema. It's not one picture that we're giving. It's a progressing picture. First of all, Avram feels fear. V'achar kach ba b'chashecha, and then he senses this darkness around him. V'achar kach gadla hachashecha, and then the darkness gets even greater. V'achar kach hirgish ki'ilu hi nofeles alav. And then Avram feels like it's falling on him. Kimasa kaved, like a heavy burden, tichbad bimenu, too heavy for him. So just to look back at the phrasing, top line of the pasuk. V'nei eima, there's a fear, that's one sentiment. Chashecha, a darkness, that's a second sentiment. Gedola, an increasing of the darkness, is a third sentiment. And Nofeles Alav, falling upon him, totally overweighing him, totally beyond his ability to bear, is the 4th sense that he has. And based on that, back to the Ramban, the 4th line in the Ramban, and the 2nd line, from that, Amru, Ema zu Bavel. The experience of fear refers to the Galus of Bavel, the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. Chashecha zu Madai. The sense of darkness refers to the experience with Madai. Sheikh Shicha Eineim Shel Yisrael Bitzom Uvitanis. That the Jewish people had all kinds of hardships under Galus Madai, with fasting and deprivation. Gedola zu Malchus Antiochus. The word of great, that it was just great, refers to the experience with the Greeks. Nofeles Alav, this feeling of totally falling in on him, which sounds like the worst of it all. Zu Edom. That's what we're in now. That's been over all these many, many years. V'yaha'inyan hazel Avraham. This is relevant for Avraham. Ki kishakadosh baruch hu karas imo bris, laseis haaretz lazaro la'achuzas olam. God makes a covenant with Avram, and he says, I'm going to give your descendants this land of Israel. Amar lo, God clarifies to him. Kimishayer b'matanaso. It's sort of like a little bit of a disclaimer with the gift. Sha'ar ba'galios yishtabdu b'banav. That his offspring will experience these 4 exiles. V'yimshalu ba'artzam. And this land that I'm going to give to your descendants, they'll be so impacted by these 4 exiles. Sometimes the Jews will be in the land of Israel when the exile is happening. Sometimes the exile will push them out of the land of Israel. V'zeh b'almanas im yechtu lefanav. What will be the factor? How can we impact whether the exile comes, whether the exile doesn't come? Most importantly, from our perspective, how quickly will it end? It has to do with how we act. That's the point. So this is remarkable. So if a person wants to know, why are we experiencing the difficulties that our people are currently experiencing for so long? If you point to social media, if you point to this world leader, that world leader, this politician, that politician, you're not wrong, but you're not getting to the root. The root is God told Avram about this so long ago. Let's keep on going. Yitzchak gives brachos, gives blessings to his two sons, Yaakov and Esav. Now, we descend from Yaakov, from Jacob. Esav, Edom, that's the galus that we're currently in, is considered to descend from Esav. So looking a little bit at how Yaakov talks in futuristic terms to his sons, it might be important for us. So just to put you in the context of the psukim here, you know the story. Yaakov presented himself as Esav. Yaakov receives the blessing based on his mother's guidance of what he should do. And then Esav shows up afterwards coming for his blessing, and his blessing is, Yitzchak said, I can't help you, I already gave the blessing. So Esav says, you do not have any blessings for me. Vayan Yitzchak aviv vayomer elav. Yitzchak says to Esav, Hinei mishmanei aretz yeh moshevecha, mital hashamayim me'ol. I'm going to give you the fat of the land. Dew will come down from heaven. It'll be very good for you in all kinds of ways. V'alchar b'cha sichyeh. You'll live by your sword. Again, there are all kinds of nations that we know of and thought of that have descended from Esav. V'yes ochicha ta'avod. I just want to clarify, because I'm sure it's on some people's minds. The Arabs do not descend from Esav. The Arabs descend from Yishmael. We have a Wednesday night women's class. Yes, that was a shameful plug, but it was anyway. We have a Wednesday night women's class. We're currently learning Sefer Daniel, and it's interesting. We've shared that Daniel has all these prophetic visions, and there are opinions that say that the final exile is actually descendants of Yishmael, which is interesting to think about. But the traditional perspective that we're focusing on is descendants of Edom. Of Esav, excuse me. You'll live by your sword, but you'll labor for your brother, for Jacob. It will be that when you rebel, you will be able to take his yoke off of your neck. The day will come where you can push back and overpower Jacob. On that, Rashi says, Klomar, when will that day come? I'm at the bottom of the first page. Kishiyavu Yisrael ala Torah. When the Jewish people violate God's commandments. V'yelucha pischon peh lidstar ala bracha shenotal. It will be justified that you're disturbed. Why is it that the Jewish people get all these brachos? They're not even living the way that they're supposed to live. When that happens, you'll be able to fight back against Jacob. So that is a very important image for us to keep in mind. This model that we control our own destiny. We as a nation control our own destiny. The more we live the way we're supposed to live, as a nation, all of us, and by the way, all of us being interested in each other, which we'll come back to, God willing, that will be the greatest impact in terms of the broader dynamic between Yaakov and Esav. Okay, moving on to the next page. Ovadia. There's a pasuk from Ovadia right at the beginning. It's a very interesting pasuk. Va'alu Moshiim b'Har Tzion lishmot es Har Esav. This is clearly a futuristic verse. The saviors will come on the mountain of Zion to judge on the mountain of Esav. V'Yisal Hashem Amlucha. And the kingship of God will become clear. This is obviously an end of days kind of verse. Zion, which obviously refers to the Jewish people. Esav, revelation of God. Look at the next source, the Ramban. V'da. You should know. Ki anu hasomchim al das Rabboseinu Zal. We that look to our the rabbinic literature for clarity. Choshvim ki anu ayom b'galus Edom. That we think of ourselves in our times. Again, the Ramban is in the same galus we're in, of being in the galus of Edom. V'she'ein lanu amida mimenu ad bo haMashiach. We won't be able to pull ourselves out of it until the ultimate redemption. Kasher Amar Avinu Azakin. That's what Yitzchak said to Esav. Vaya Kasher Tarid. Yitzchak says to Esav, whenever you push back and God gives you the ability to push back against Jacob, you're going to be in control again. Which means it's totally a constantly fluctuating possibility between Jacob and Esav. So when does it ever end? So the Ramban says, he says, if we look at the Navi Ovadia, that pasuk at the top of the page, that's the clarity. That only in the end of days, when we're talking about the mountain of Zion, we're talking about the ultimate redemption, that's when there'll be an end of terms between Yaakov and Esav. V'nei nispoyer, ki adalad malchios lo yichresu ad bo HaMashiach. These exiles of the four kingdoms won't be over until the coming of the Mashiach. Ki iskaber kol malchus mehen ala kodemes la hirach nitzuach umemshala v'lo akaras me'am ha'aretz. Really, really interesting. We shift from one empire to another empire, from one ruler to another ruler. What does that mean? What does that say? Or our traditional question that we've asked through the generations, is this good or bad for the Jews? But it's true. That's our life. And the Ramban says, look at the pasuk in Ovadia. We sit here and we look at the newspapers and we try to analyze, is this world leader good for us? Is that world leader good for us? Whose side of the war should we be on? These are questions that we've been asking in our nation for so long. Long before current events. The Ramban says it just means just different. It's musical chairs. These are my words. It's musical chairs. Who's sitting at the front of the table? The real end of the story is when the ultimate redemption comes. So just to think about that for a second. A person is so frustrated by the anti-Semitism in this world. Who's not? So you know what? A person finally says, that's it. I've tried all this different stuff. You know what? I'm going to ask God for help. I know what I'm going to daven for. I'm going to daven that the anti-Semitism should end. That's a good thing to daven for. It's a very good thing to daven for. But the Ramban will tell you, you know what? There's something even more broad to daven for. That's the same endpoint. Daven for the redemption. That's a good point. Somebody should compose a prayer to daven for the redemption. Guess what? Just look at your siddur. It's there. I promise you, it's in there. Numerous references in Shemona Esrei. And it's so interesting. We think, my guess is this is part of what Stuart was thinking about to begin with. We have a difficult time talking about the redemption. We're all for it, but I don't even know what it's supposed to be like. And it's also a little bit unclear, but we still have the same political parties if we have the redemption. We still have football teams. We get a little bit nervous about this stuff, a little bit. But this is an example of something. I don't mean that the redemption is all about anti-Semitism, but it's partially about anti-Semitism. These are things we can relate to. We come to Tisha B'Av. Every year we come to Tisha B'Av. We don't have to wait for Tisha B'Av. But every year we come to Tisha B'Av and say, oh gosh, I don't know how to daven for, I don't know what it's like to have a base of Mikdash, I don't know how to daven. Just look at the news of the day and ask yourself how different it would be. This is not what it's all about, but it's part of it. Let's keep on going. Next source is the Maral. V'kasher tovin daled malchios elu. when you reflect on these 4 different exiles, Teda, you'll realize, Ki gimu malchios mosheles kol achas al Yisrael be'inyan miyuchad. The Ramban sort of touched on this. The Maral is saying it in a different way. Each of these exiles actually hit on the Jews in a unique way. Malchus Bavel lo ratzah l'shabed osam elorak beguf. Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, all he really wanted was that we physically should be bound to him. Didn't really care that much, would we keep our faith, not keep our faith. That wasn't his primary focus. Malchus Madai ratzah lakachas nafsham. Madai wanted to kill us. Umalchus Yavan ratzah levatlam mitorasam. The Greeks, that's the Hanukkah story, not only the Hanukkah story, but wanted to take us away from our theology. Shishlemus haseichel. So it could be that you want to have us physically bound to you. It could be you just want to not have us around at all. It could be you want to have us take on your theology. Umalchus revi'i, but the 4th one, the one that we're in now, mishabdim bahem b'shlosha. The 4th one has all of the above. Ba'ol, our people have had terrible slavery and physical difficulty and challenge, not all necessarily at the same time. Varuge Malchus, people have been killed. We could certainly relate to that story. V'gazu shelo yisasku b'Torah, the decrees about the Jews not connecting to our Torah, we could certainly relate. I mean, just even, in the last 100 years, we can think of all of these examples. The Maral says this 4th galus is supposed to equal up with all 3 of them combined. And so when we feel like it just feels like we're bouncing from one challenge to the next, that's the game plan. That's the divine game plan. Sad. But there's something slightly encouraging, at least it feels like there's a plan here. And of course, part of that plan is an ultimate redemption. Next source is the Sfas Emes. I had a classmate in elementary school who would sometimes have the unique practice of walking with a friend down the sidewalk, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, pushing the kid into the street. No cars coming. Pushing the kid into the street, and then pulling the kid back onto the sidewalk. And then he would turn to the kid and say, "You should be grateful. I saved you." And again, there were no cars coming. I don't recommend it, but so lahavdil. Sometimes when we give praise to God for the great salvations, it feels a little bit like that's what we're talking about. Do we believe that God runs the world? So if we believe that God runs the world, oh God, there was this terrible, terrible power that did this to us and did that to us, and it was terrible, and you saved us, God, and we thank you. You ever stop for a moment and say, but who put us in the problem in the first place? We believe that God runs the world. So how do we wrap our minds around that one? So the normal Jewish response is we just pause for a moment and we eat more food. That's normally but just to think about it for a moment, because when we celebrate we have good food. So it's so Sfas Emes, bottom source on the page here. B'vadai yesh bnei Yisrael lahamin ki kochos shel ha'umos. We believe that all the strength and the power of different nations, v'asher matzlichim b'gzeiroseim, and that which there are nations who try to do terrible things to us, and they succeed. Hakol ba'asaga el yona l'tovas b'nei Yisrael. Might not appreciate it in the moment, but philosophically we believe that somehow, some way, this is for the Jewish people's benefit. Maybe not in the short term, but somehow, some way in the long term. And we probably will never understand most of them. Your kingdom, the verse, we say it in Ashrei, your kingdom is the kingdom of all worlds. You're in charge of all of it. V'chol hadalad malchios, all these 4 exiles, hemrak, kedei litzmoach mizeh, hakaras malchus shamayim, kinyin she'im yiske yavchin. You know what these exiles bring us to? These exiles bring us to a greater understanding of the hand of God. These exiles bring us to a greater understanding of how much we need God. These exiles bring us to a greater understanding of what our lives are supposed to be about. As someone was commenting to me a few minutes ago, it's so true. These exiles bring us to a greater understanding of how interested we are in each other and how much we care about each other. So we can't begin to wrap our minds around it in the moment, nor should we try. But he says the real big picture is these terrible scenarios that God brings on the Jewish people are compelling us to pull it together in a different way. As individuals and connecting with each other as a nation. So it's not like my friend who would push a kid into the street. There's a real purpose in it. V'lochein. Think about that line of Rashi at the beginning when Yitzchak says to Esav, that the day will come when you'll be able to overpower your brother. Rashi says that moment is when the Jewish people are not living the way we're supposed to be living. I just have to say, I hope it's obvious to everyone in the room, but whenever these topics come up, I have to clarify. There is, and the Talmud says this in various places, it's based on verses in the Chumash. We can never say that if a person has something terrible happen to them, or a group of people have something terrible happen to them, it must be they did something bad. That should never be our hashkafa. There is an idea, though, that when our nation has something terrible happen, it could very well be that God is trying to send us a message. That's a very significant distinction, and I can't emphasize enough. And even when we say that, now good luck on trying to figure out the message. And I always have to give this disclaimer, even if you write for the Jewish press, you still don't necessarily know the meaning of the message. But even when there's a national calamity, we have no right or reason to say there's a correlation between the people who are directly affected and the broader national issue. It's just important to just keep that in mind always. V'lochein, be'ez ha'geula mikol malchus, whenever we're redeemed from whatever difficulty of whatever government, niskala, shekol koach ha'malchus haya me'abore yisparach, we realize in retrospect that all of the power and ability of that kingdom was from God. This was all part of a plan. V'zeh inyan halav v'hodah. Chanukah, if you notice, the piece is on Chanukah. That the idea is that Chanukah is about days of praise. So once we have salvation, we take a step back and we recognize we are different people than before this started. And we see this was all part of God's broad plan. And we give thanks. We give thanks for the salvation, but we also give thanks for the greater perspective. Okay, on to the next page. There's the top of the next page is from Bereshis Lamed Aleph. Further with Yaakov. Yaakov has split, has fled Yitzchak's home after the whole thing with the bracha. And Yaakov has all kinds of problems with his father-in-law Lavan. All kinds of problems. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, God willing. And finally, Yaakov decides that it's time for him to break with Lavan. But he has to talk to his wives. He has to talk to Rachel and Leah, who are Lavan's daughters. Vayishlach Yaakov vayikra l'Rachel u'Leah. By the way, just as an aside, Yaakov is the patriarch who most represents living through great difficulty and challenge and keeping to one's principles. And Yaakov, when you look at the lives of the patriarchs, of the biblical figures, it's a whole different world. Yaakov is a different world than everybody else. And so he had all kinds of challenges throughout his life, but one of them was Lavan. And Lavan is giving him all of these difficulties, all of these problems. Vayishlach Yaakov, Vayikra l'Rachel Leah. Yaakov sent, he called to Rachel and Leah, Hasadeh Tzono. Yaakov calls to them out in the field. Vayomer Lehan, he says to them, Roeh Anochi es pnei avichem. I see the face of your father. Ki einenu elai kismo shoshom. He's not relating to me like he used to relate to me. Just take that snapshot. How many Jews have said that phrase in different contexts over the many, many generations? Not that their lives are in danger. I don't know. My coworker isn't interacting with me in the way that he used to interact with me. My business, the fellow I deal with in business isn't interacting with me. A political leader isn't interacting with me in the same way. It's a pasuk in the Chumash. His face is not towards me in the same way. And then Yaakov ends the pasuk in an interesting way. Ve'elokei avi haya imadi. The God of my father was with me. No one's going to debate that, but what's he even saying? How does that even fit with the rest of the sentence? So this pasuk could be understood different ways, but I just want to share with you what the Radak says. Ve'elokei avi haya imadi. Husone osi mikinaso. You know why your father hates me? He's jealous of me. Ki rechushi rav. You know, if you remember the story, Yaakov had all these arrangements with Lavan, and then miraculously, and Lavan made very Lavan-friendly deals. And then miraculously, it always came out to Yaakov's benefit. Why did it always come out to Yaakov's benefit? Because it's good to have God on your side. Just to be clear, there were no bankers in New Zealand at the time, or whatever the theory is. So I had great success. Velo, I think this is a typo. If it is, it's mine. Velo Michel. I'm sorry. Velo Michelo. It's not that I took anything of Lavan's. I didn't take anything that. Ella ki elokei avi haya imadi v'tzliach darki. God brought me success. So the Radak says that the end of the pasuk is giving the cause for why Lavan is interacting with me in the way that he is. I've been successful. Lavan is jealous of my success. So Yaakov has to deal with that, how he has to deal with that, and how many people through the generations have gotten to the point where they just had to shrug their shoulders and say, the people around here, the people I'm working with aren't interacting with me in a positive way. I'm just going to have to pick up and go. Not even necessarily because my life is in danger. I can't have that success anymore. It's just not going to work. In our times, there are people making this decision. But throughout our times. Really interesting set of psukim. Yaakov leaves. Lavan ultimately catches up to him. And Lavan comes to Yaakov and says, I don't know. Here it is, my grandchildren. You took away my grandchildren. You just ran. Aren't we friends? What's this all about? And there's this bizarre set of psukim. It's near the end of a parsha. Most of us are already kind of like flipping to see how long Daf Torah is at that point. We don't pay that much attention to it. So Yaakov and Lavan make a pact. And basically there's like a stone and a pile of stones. It's a little bit tricky. I don't want to get too much involved in detail. But I just want to read the psukim quickly and show you a comment from the Vilna Gaon. Vayomer Lavan, Hagal hazeh ei beini uveincha hayom. There's this mound of stones here, and this stands as a testimony. This is Lavan speaking to Yaakov. This stands as a testimony between me and you today. Alkein karashmo gal eid. So he calls it gal eid, the mound of testimony. V'ha mitzvah, sofa is to see. Mitzvah is some language of like a monument or something. Asher Amar Yitzef Hashem Beini Uvenecha. He says there's also a mitzvah that God should see between me and you. Kini Saser Yishmereu, because we're going to be hidden one from the other. Says Lavan, Im Tanes Benosai. If you afflict my daughters, because you know that was the problem, by the way. That's why they split, because Yaakov was being a terrible husband to his wives. You might not have known that, but Lavan knew that. Im tanes benosai, if you afflict my daughters. Vim tikach noshim al benosai, if you marry additional wives that will be wronging my daughters. Ein ish imanu, there's no one who's going to be able to judge between us. Re'ei Elokim eid beini uveinecha. God is my witness, Yaakov. Don't you dare be bad to my daughters. Okay. Vayomer Lavan liYaakov. Lavan says to Yaakov, V'nei agal hazeh, v'nei hamatzeva, asher yarisi beini uveinecha. There is this mound and this monument that I placed between us. Eid agal hazeh, this mound is testimony. Ve'edah matzeva, the monument is testimony. Im ani lo avori lecha sagal hazeh, v'matah lo savori lai sagal hazeh, v'samatzeva azos l'ra'ah. Neither one of us should wrong each other. Okay, let's see what the Vilna Gaon says about this. Right at the top of the page, the Gra. V'hamitzpah asher amar. Ha'inyan shel gal u'mitzpah. There is gal, the mound, and mitzpah, this language of monument or vision or something. V'shegal hu'inyan galui. A mound is a very open thing, very evident. You walk and you see, you walk into a piece of land and you say, oh, there's a big pile of stones. U'mitzpah dvar seiser. Mitzpah is like sofeh is a language like of prophecy, by the way. It's like of prophetic vision. So to see is something hidden. Lefizeh asi shapir. So the Vilna Gaon says it actually makes a lot of sense. Shalavan Amar. Lavan says to Yaakov, Imani lo avores elecha es hagal. Shalavan lo yuchal lavor rak begaloi. How would Lavan be in violation of this arrangement? The way Lavan would be in violation of this arrangement is if he openly attacks Yaakov. That's what Yaakov's worried about. The only way that he can be in violation is in a very obvious way. Avo Yaakov Lavan, but Yaakov and Lavan, hayayachol lavod begalui, begalui ubeseiser. There's all kinds of ways that Yaakov can violate the deal. Yaakov can do it openly. Yaakov can do it privately. Yaakov can marry other wives. Yaakov, in the privacy of his own home, can be bad to his current wives. If you afflict my daughters, harizeh b'seiser, that's a hidden thing. And if you marry other wives, that's an open thing. I think this Vilna Gaon is very interesting pshat in the Psukim, and I think it's extremely relevant to the topic of anti-Semitism, because one of the biggest things we hear about, and we certainly talk about it a lot today, for good reason, feels like the Jews are playing by a different set of rules than everybody else. And it feels like the expectations of the Jewish people are very different than what's expected of everybody else. It feels that way a lot in the Middle East. And so the Vilna Gaon says that Lavan is saying to Yaakov, we're going to make a chart of what obligations are. So my obligations to you are not to openly attack you. Okay. Your obligations to me are not to publicly disgrace my daughters, nor to privately disgrace them. And this is all just again, Yaakov is happy to be a good husband. He doesn't need Lavan to tell him to be a good husband. But just even the basic framework is totally unbalanced. But that's our story. That's our story. That doesn't mean, I want to be very clear, I don't mean that the Jews never do anything wrong. It's not what I'm saying. We're not perfect. But things seem to be so unbalanced in expectations. Next source, Shem Shmuel. I thought this was just a really interesting perspective. So you ever ask yourself, what's Yaakov supposed to get out of all of this? We were talking earlier about that there's benefits to all these things. What does Yaakov gain from this? What does Yaakov gain from dealing with, for all these years, with all these challenges of Lavan, even down to how they part? Shem Shmuel says, V'lazeh hayad siruf v'amiruf b'beis Lavan harami, shu hefech midas hatam. Yaakov is described at our introduction to Yaakov in the Torah as an ish tam. a pure person. I just want to be very clear, the normal way it's understood is not like the boy at the Seder, the Tom. You could understand the boy at the Seder in different ways, but he is a pure. You ever had a conversation with a person who's just like as straight and narrow as they come, and so good and so ethical, and there's someone so immoral, and you're just so worried about the ethical person because like they don't even have the radar for this kind of stuff. They don't think that way. So what's Yaakov doing with Lavan? Yaakov constantly needs to sort of deal with Lavan on Lavan's terms. What did he need this for? Vizel Esrim Shana, for 20 years it was like that. And yet, despite all those challenges, he was still able to be straight and ethical and moral to himself, to his family, and to God. Zeh im Lavan garti v'taryag mitzvah shamarti. Famous medrash. When Yaakov ultimately meets up with Esav, he says one version of the medrash is, I lived with Lavan and I observed the 613 mitzvahs. Okay, good for you. Gosh, how was it hard to find, corned beef that was kosher in Lavan's house? I mean, like, what's the... He says this is the point. V'nispara midaso shu ish tam moshel al midas tam shabo v'libo birshuso. Yaakov's heart was still under his own control despite all the dealings with Lavan. It's an interesting thing to think about. An interesting thing to think about when one is dealing with... I don't want to get too far into just discussing the obvious, and I certainly don't want to get into politics. But just to think for a moment, how many times have you pulled out your hair over months of all these discussions? Well, you have the state of Israel and you have Hamas. I'm not talking about the people I'm not talking about the average Palestinian. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the people of Hamas. The state of Israel and the people of Hamas. It's got to be fair. It's got to be this. It's got to be that. What are you talking about? These people. What are you talking about? The idea that we, as a country representing a nation, can still conduct ourselves. Is every idea of operation perfect? Surely not. But overall, can still conduct ourselves with so much morality and so much ethics is awesome. And it's a statement about who we are as a people. And this is the point here that he's saying, I think, that Yaakov can deal with Lavan for all of that, and he can still be ethical, and he can still be moral. And that's a tremendous growth opportunity and opportunity to define one's essence. I think there's something to think about there. Okay, we're really winding down, actually. Okay, one more thing with Yaakov. Yaakov ultimately reunites with Esav. Really famous pasuk, and you can't talk about anti-Semitism without at least quoting this medrash. But we're going to see a twist on it. Vayaratz Esav the Kraso vayichabkeyu. Esav runs to greet Yaakov and hugs him. Vayipol al tzavarav vayishakeyu. And Esav falls on Yaakov's neck and kisses him. Vayivku, and they cried. As I'm sure many of you are familiar, the word Vayishakeyu in the pasuk here has dots on it. It's that way in the Torah as well. This is clearly some message from the Torah. Rashi says, Vayishakeyu nakud Allah. There are dots over he kissed him. V'yesh cholken b'davar hazeh b'braisa d'sifri. Yesh shedarshan akudazu shalom neshako b'chol libo. Some say he kissed him with an asterisk. Meaning, by the way, we can totally relate to this one. Oh, my dear friend, it's so wonderful to see you, brother. He kisses him, but he didn't really mean it. That's I'm sure Jewish world leaders can relate to that greatly. Amar Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Reb Shimon ben Yochai says another pshat. Halacha hi biyodua she'esav sonei Yaakov. It's a known thing. Esav hates Yaakov. This is quoted a lot, this line. It just is the way of the world. It just is the way of the world. Esav hates Yaakov. Esav hates Yaakov. Deal with it. That's how God created the world. That's just the deal. Esav's descendants hate Jacob's descendants. We can do it all. We can say it all. They're still going to hate us. And in a way, that's a little bit of what we're talking about. I want to be very clear. We're not saying everybody, but there are people in this world that are just always going to hate us. It is interesting. So keep on going, though. What really happened is at this moment, the reason it puts the dots over it is because despite Esav's enmity for Yaakov, he really meant it when he kissed him. It's the other pshat. It's an interesting thing to think about. And now I want to share with you a netziv, which is Reb Naftali for you to Berlin. A very interesting comment. It's Hamik Dover. It's right at the top of the page. Vayivku. It says they cried. That's the last word of the pasuk. However you understand what was going on when Esav kissed Yaakov, and they cried. Both of them cried. Shneim bachu. They both cried. Balalamid says the Netziv, this comes to teach us. Shagam Yaakov nisorer alav l'shazu ava le'Esav. Yaakov felt love for Esav at that point in time. It was real. For Esav, it was real, like that second shot that we saw, despite the departure from the norm. For Esav, it was real, and you know what? For Yaakov, it was real. V'chein l'doros, and that's how it is for generations. B'shah shezera Esav misorerim beruach tara lahakir as zera Yisrael u'ma'alasam. At a time that Esav is aroused, Esav's descendants is aroused with the spirit of purity to see the greatness of the Jewish people, to appreciate our greatness. There can be a time like that. Esav in this moment appreciated the goodness of Yaakov. His descendants can appreciate us. Guess what? When and if that happens, os gam anachnu misorerim lahakir es Esav, it can be mutual. We can feel the same way towards them. Ki achinuhu. In the end of the day, Esav is our brother. Some of you surely are familiar in the times of the Mishnah with the fascinating dynamic between Rebbe and Antoninos, and they had this fascinating relationship. It can happen. So, this is an interesting netziv to think about, what this netziv is saying, and he's learning it from the context of the thing with Esav. Doesn't mean that they always like us, but they can. It's possible. It's not impossible. But it's probably not to be easily expected. Okay, I want to share one thing from Rav Hirsch here, and then just so you shouldn't get your hopes up too much, there's one or two things I just want to read for you that I don't have printed out for you. I know the feeling of being near the end of the handout and thinking that we're almost done. So Shamshon Rav Hirsch, just for the pasuk, this might ring a bell for some of you. I assure you I'm not going to ask. I actually quoted this Rav Hirsch in Shul just a few weeks ago. I was very moved by it. Mitzvah of not eating from the Gid Anosha, the sciatic nerve. It's this difficult mitzvah to relate to. So Yaakov wrestles with the angel of Esav, and the angel of Esav strikes Yaakov in the thigh, and Yaakov is limping, and therefore, when we get a cut of kosher meat that was shechted and salted and all that stuff, we have to make sure not to eat the sciatic nerve. What even are we supposed? Is it because we're supposed to remember that Yaakov wrestled with Esav's angel? Okay, I'm really sorry that his thigh got injured, but how How does that make me a better human being? It's just difficult to understand. This is not the only approach by a long shot, but it's very interesting to think about. Hirsch says as follows. After all this, the meaning of the prohibition cannot be doubted. The spirit of Esav, just to remind everybody, Yaakov has the encounter with Esav's angel before Yaakov and Esav meet. It's right before Yaakov and Esav meet. Esav is coming with 400 men. Yaakov is terrified. He doesn't know what's going to happen. And then he has this encounter with some angel that represents Esav. The spirit of Esav will not be able to conquer Jacob, nor to throw him down throughout the whole fight against him during the long ages of darkness on earth, but will be able to hamstring him, to prevent him standing firmly on both feet. Without a firm stand and walk, does Jacob go through history. Yaakov limps away from the encounter. And this lack of stability is a necessary factor ultimately to open Esav's eyes. Did Jacob stand like Esav at the head of his 400 warriors? Esav comes with his army, Yaakov comes with his army. The fact that he cannot be conquered would never show the finger of God in history. Therefore, the descendants of Jacob too are not to eat this tendon of submission and material weakness. Whenever they sit down to table, the admonition from the story of their wanderings of their life shall come to them, that they are cheerfully to renounce this tendon, this submission of their strength to Esav. Realize that their existence and the continuation of their existence is not dependent on it. We don't have to have the best weapons around. If we have the opportunity, we should absolutely take the opportunity, and we should be glad that we have those weapons. But even if there's a time that we don't have the best weapons, that they are not to feel without it. They are less protected and less certain of enduring through the ages, because they are not armed with the sword like Esav, yea, cannot even take a firm step on earth. Strength for Jacob Israel lies in other higher factors which cannot be weakened by Esav. The Jews are never, not until the redemption, the Jews are never going to be the strongest nation. It's just not who we are. And many times we're going to be limping along. But we're going to be there. And we're going to be there till the end. And Rav Hirsch is saying that every time we sit down for a piece of meat, you can't eat the sciatic nerve. It reminds us of that. It's an interesting thing to think about. If Jacob does fall, it falls not because it is not equal to Esav in material power, but because it had not understood how to retain the protection of its God for itself. If Israel stands, it stands not because of its strong material power, but because its God bears it aloft on the eagle wings of his almightiness. It's a beautiful thing to think about. Okay, I want to just bear with me for a few moments, please. I want to read to you. I'm sorry for not including it in the handout. I want to thank, there are a number of people who sent me different articles and book suggestions, and I'm so grateful. I have to confess, some of it I did have the opportunity to look at, some of it I didn't. Max Rudman actually sent me this article, and I just want to read to you a piece of it. I just think it fits very much with what we're talking about. Max shared it from me from the JNS website, I believe. It's written by someone by the name of Raphael Pach. He works for Aish, but it doesn't seem like he was I think he works in communications for Aish. But I thought this was just a beautiful perspective. It's a longer piece. I just want to read for you a brief part of it. I think it fits very much with what we're talking about. This confusion extends to another common refrain heard from Jewish communities worldwide, that we just want to be left alone, to live in peace and quiet. Anyone try to sign up for that one? It's a reasonable desire, even an understandable one. Yet history keeps proving it's not an option available to us. The book of Judges offers a haunting pattern. Whenever the text speaks of Jews living peacefully, each person sitting under their fig tree or vine, Without unified purpose or centralized leadership, enemies inevitably rise up against us. Amalek first demonstrated this in the desert, attacking the newly freed Israelites not because of anything they had done, but because of who they were called to be. Without unity and purpose, Jews become vulnerable. Our enemies don't attack us randomly. They do so to remind us that we have a collective mission, a path God laid out for us to make the world better, individually and as a people. Every generation since that at Sinai has learned this lesson, often painfully. Which brings us to perhaps the most perplexing question in our endless cycle of self-defense. Why does the world apply impossible double standards to Israel? Why is a nation the size of New Jersey subject to more UN resolutions than the rest of the world combined? We spend countless hours documenting hypocrisy, cataloging bias, and fact-checking false claims, necessary work to be sure, but we rarely pause to acknowledge what Jewish tradition teaches. The obsession is baked into our destiny. Deuteronomy explicitly states that the land of Israel is where God's eyes will be on from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. People will always scrutinize Israel with impossible intensity because that's precisely what we were told would happen. And this is where we get it wrong in our constant defensive posture on social media and mainstream media. We act surprised by hatred and double standards, as if better hasbara, public relations, or sharper talking points might finally convince the world to leave us alone. But the meditation we recite at the end of every Amidah, composed by the Talmudic sage Mar Bar Ravino, offers a different framework entirely. I'm going to skip it, but just think about it. Many of us are familiar. God, please let people look upon me favorably. We ask for divine protection from those who counsel together to do us harm. We must have faith that God will provide it. But like our forefather Jacob, who both prayed and prepared for confrontation with Esav, we cannot rely on prayer alone. We must also do the practical work of defending ourselves. The wisdom isn't choosing between spiritual faith and practical defense. It's holding both simultaneously. It's acknowledging our interconnectedness as a people while refusing to accept blame for terrorism. It's recognizing that the world's obsession with Israel is both biblically predicted and morally wrong. And it's understanding that we can't simply wish to be left alone, while also accepting that we have a mission that prevents us from fading into quiet obscurity. Until we articulate these nuances in our own defense and in our understanding of ourselves, we'll keep missing the point almost as badly as those who attack us. So I thought it was a very interesting perspective. Thank you. And Rabbi Bera Wein is a fascinating. You don't always have to agree with everything that he writes, but he has a fascinating perspective on things. There's a book that came out quite recently. Yitzchak was kind enough to remind me about this. Do you remember? I should have taken it down. Do you remember the name of the book from Rabbi Wein about anti-Semitism? Do you remember?
Endless Hatred.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Endless Hatred, just in case you didn't hear it. And I'll just tell you, somebody gave me as a gift, this is actually not written by Rabbi Wein, Zichrono Livracha, sorry. Really a great presence in Klal Yisrael, particularly in our perspective of the world. This is a book written by a fellow who met regularly with Rabbi Wein or got recordings of Rabbi Wein's talks since October 7th. It's called Turmoil Through the Eyes of Faith. It's not written by Rabbi Wein, but it's based on talks by Rabbi Wein. It's a very, very thoughtful. Just for anyone who the voice of Rabbi Wein just like kind of, echoes through your background. I just want to read this to you. On Simchas Torah 5784, I was spending Yom Tov with my daughter and her family in Ramat Beit Shemesh. During the course of that unforgettable day, because of all the rockets and sirens, I had to go down to the bomb shelter 8 times. The author just notes here, this is a quote from Rabbi Wein, but the author just notes, Rabbi Wein was almost 90 years old on the day of the attack, with very poor eyesight. Going up and down 8 times to a bomb shelter on Yom Tov must have been very physically taxing for him. At the end of that very long day, my daughter turned to me and asked, "How do you feel, Abba?" I have never felt more Jewish, I answered her. No, but you could imagine it being said in different ways. But this is our path. This is our path. It's terrible. It's challenging. There must be a reason for it. But in the end of the day, this was told to Avram Avinu. We see it. We see snippets through the life of Yaakov Avinu. We see references to this in the Nevuah. This is what we're moving towards. So it's terribly distressing and it's terribly depressing. But, and my apologies for people who hear me talk about this a lot, there's this arc of history. We're moving towards the end. We so clearly are moving towards the end, and the pieces are moving so quickly. It should be b'mheira v'yameinu, speedily in our days, but just think about it. If you were writing, reflections on the last 2 years, on the last 5 years, Lord, on the last 3 months, you know how many major world events that have something to do with the Jewish people you'd be writing down? It's crazy. Ask yourself how many events like that you would be writing down over the last 50 years. Major events, major world events that impact the Jewish people, and where we stand in the land of Israel specifically. My gosh, I'm sure there are people who will tell me I'm wrong. I think there are some people who would make a list over the last 25 years. It could very well be you'd come up with more things on your list from the last 3. It's amazing. And we don't know why this problem and that problem, we don't know. And we can't just sit idly by. We have to protect ourselves. We have to do everything we can. But if we just keep on holding on, the ultimate redemption should come speedily in our days. So we should all merit that. And thank you, everyone, for coming. If anybody has any comments or questions, I'm not rushing anywhere, but it's already 10:40, so if anybody wants to leave, they should feel totally free.